"Stay quiet, follow me," poor cleaner told the billionaire. Minutes later, he was stunned. The mop bucket had a broken wheel. It had been broken since February, which meant Zola Beaumont dragged it sideways across every floor of Meridian Tower, the same way she'd been dragging herself through life for the past 3 years, lopsided, slightly off balance, still moving. She didn't complain about the bucket. Complaining cost energy she didn't have to spend. It was a Tuesday in October, which meant the building was running at its usual rhythm. The law firms on 12 through 15 were loud and caffeinated by 8 a.m. The private equity offices on 20 through 23 were quieter but somehow more dangerous, like pressure building behind a sealed door, and the executive suites on 31, Ashford Group's 3 full floors, were so still and climate-controlled that cleaning them felt like mopping the inside of a luxury coffin. Zola had been cleaning those floors for 6 months. She knew every corner, every conference room that smelled like stale ambition and cold brew, every bathroom where someone had taped a motivational quote above the sink. "You are exactly where you need to be." She'd stared at that one long enough one Thursday morning that she'd laughed, a sharp, involuntary sound that startled even herself. She was not where she needed to be. She was where she could afford to be. There was a difference. On this particular Tuesday, she'd been pulled from her 31st floor rotation and sent to do a lobby deep clean. One of the building's major tenants had a prospective investor walk through at 11, and lobby presentation mattered. So Zola was on ground level by 8:15, polishing the baseboards near the main entrance with the slow, meditative focus she'd developed over months of repetitive work. The same focus she used to use when she was studying contract law at Columbia, back when the future still looked like something that belonged to her. She was working near the security desk, half hidden behind a large potted ficus that the building's interior designer had placed there for aesthetic reasons and that every member of the cleaning staff had silently voted to throw out. The ficus gave her an unobstructed view of the main revolving door without herself being particularly visible. That wasn't strategic. It was just where the baseboard was dirtiest. She noticed the first man at 8:47. He came in through the side entrance, not the main revolving door, and moved with a particular kind of stillness that Zola had learned to recognize. Not the stillness of someone calm, the stillness of someone deliberately erasing their own presence. He was black, heavyset in his 40s, wearing a dark suit slightly too formal for the building's usual morning foot traffic. He bought a coffee from the lobby kiosk without making eye contact with the barista. He stood near the elevator bank with the cup in his hand, not drinking, looking at his phone. Zola went back to the baseboard. 4 minutes later, a second man appeared. Different entrance, the parking garage elevator on the west side. He was younger, leaner, wearing nearly the same suit. He didn't approach the first man. They didn't acknowledge each other at all. He positioned himself near the building directory, also staring at his phone. 2 men, 2 entrances, both watching the elevator bank. Zola straightened slowly, pressing one hand against the small of her back. She looked at the revolving door. She looked at the 2 men again. She had grown up in Englewood, which is a neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, where you learned certain things early, whether you wanted to or not. One of those things was the difference between a man waiting for someone and a man positioned to intercept someone. The posture was different. The eyes were different. These 2 were not waiting. They were set. The elevator on the far left opened at 8:53. The man who walked out was tall, well over 6 feet, with close-cropped hair starting to silver at the temples and the kind of bone structure that looked like it had been engineered for boardrooms. His suit was charcoal, exquisitely cut, and his shoes cost more than Zola's monthly rent. He was alone, distracted, already moving toward the revolving door with the long, unhurried stride of a man accustomed to having the world arrange itself around him. Zola didn't know who he was. She did know that both men across the lobby had shifted the moment those elevator doors opened. Not obviously. Not enough that the security guard at the desk would catch it. But she was watching from behind a ficus with a mop in her hand, and she saw it, the lean in, the micro-adjustment of position, the coffee cup lowered without being sipped. The tall man in the charcoal suit was going to walk right into them. He had maybe 30 feet before he cleared the lobby column, blocking his sightline to the west entrance man. 20 feet before the first man near the elevator bank could move in from behind. The security guard was on the phone. There were 4 other people in the lobby, 2 in their own worlds, 1 heading into the building cafe, 1 already out the door. Zola had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision. She made it in 1. She left the mop bucket where it was, broken wheel and all, and cut across the lobby at a diagonal, moving fast but not running, keeping her body between the tall man and the elevator bank. She came up on his left side, close enough that he startled slightly and grabbed his sleeve, just below the elbow, firm and deliberate, and turned her face toward his with an urgency that came not from training, but from necessity. "Stay quiet," she said. Her voice was barely above a breath. "Follow me, right now." He looked at her. His eyes dropped to her blue cleaning uniform, the white apron, the yellow rubber gloves still on her hands. Something between confusion and offense crossed his face. "Excuse me, there are 2 men in this lobby who've been watching that elevator bank since before you came down," she said, still whispering. "1 behind you at your 7 o'clock near the kiosk, 1 at your 10 o'clock by the directory. They moved when your elevator opened. I've been watching them for 6 minutes. She held eye contact. "You can ignore me, or you can come with me. Decide now." 3 seconds of silence that felt like 3 minutes, then something shifted in his expression. Not quite belief, but the specific calculation of a man who'd survived enough of the world to know that some warnings came from unlikely directions. He followed her. She moved fast, keeping the column between them and the man near the elevator bank, cutting left toward the service corridor door that the cleaning staff used and that most building occupants had never noticed existed. She pushed it open with her shoulder, pulled him through, and let it close behind them. They were suddenly in a narrow concrete hallway that smelled like cleaning supplies and mechanical air, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the lobby noise cut to almost nothing. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be. She could tell by the way he was working to control it. "Who are you?" he demanded. Not loudly, he'd had the presence of mind to keep his voice down, but with the full weight of someone accustomed to being answered. "I work here, building cleaning staff, lobby rotation today." She pulled out her phone, a cracked screen Android she'd been meaning to replace for a year, and brought up the lobby camera feed that the cleaning supervisor had access to for coordinating floor coverage. She turned the screen toward him. The 2 men were visible. They'd converged near the revolving door, scanning the lobby. The older one said something to the younger one. The younger one pulled out his own phone. The tall man stared at the screen. His jaw was tight. "You said 6 minutes," he said. 8:47. Different entrances. Bought nothing, talked to no one, never used the elevators. They were positioned to intercept whoever came off that bank. She pocketed her phone. "I don't know who you are, but I know what that looked like." A pause. "Where does this corridor go?" he asked. "Service hallway runs the building perimeter. Freight elevator at the end goes to the parking structure and the loading dock on Wacker. There's also a boiler room 40 feet ahead, lockable from the inside. And you have a key." "I have keys to everything in this building," she said. "Comes with the mop." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes she couldn't quite name. Then the corner of his mouth shifted, barely, in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but lived next door to one. "The boiler room," he said. "Follow me." This time he didn't hesitate. They moved down the corridor in near silence, the fluorescent lights casting everything in flat, honest light that made his suit look somehow out of place, and her uniform look entirely correct. 40 feet, 45, past industrial cleaning carts and a wall-mounted fire extinguisher and a door marked Authorized Personnel. She stopped at the next door, found the right key on the second try, pushed it open. The boiler room was large, warm, and humming with the deep mechanical sound of a building keeping itself alive. Pipes ran the length of the ceiling. The air tasted like hot metal and old concrete. Zola locked the door behind them and turned to face him. He had his phone out already, texting rapidly, face unreadable. "Is there anyone you can call?" she asked. "I'm handling it," he said. "Okay." She sat down on a metal equipment crate, folded her hands in her lap and waited. He glanced at her. She watched him try to categorize her and fail, the expression that settled on his face. She would think about it later, trying to name it. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't surprise anymore either. It was something older than both of those, something that looked strangely like recognition. "Callum Ashford," he said. The name dropped into the room quietly, like he was testing what it sounded like in here, in this light, with this particular person watching him say it. Zola nodded once. "I know," she said. He stared at her. "I've been cleaning your floor since April," she said. 31 through 33, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday if your team has an event. The silence that followed had weight to it, the specific texture of something a person realizes too late. The shape of all the mornings he'd walked past her without looking, all the days she'd been present and invisible in the same breath. Before either of them could find the right words for that, the sound started. A key, scraping slowly against the other side of the boiler room door. Deliberate, patient, like whoever was holding it wanted them to hear it first, wanted them to understand that wherever they'd thought they were hidden, they were wrong. Someone knew exactly where they were. The man behind the suit story. "Stay quiet, follow me," poor cleaner told the billionaire. Minutes later he was stunned. Setting Chicago, Illinois, Meridian Tower Boiler Room. Ashford Group executive floor characters in focus. Zola Beaumont. Callum Ashford. Neither of them moved. The scraping continued, unhurried, almost lazy, and then stopped. A beat of silence so complete that Zola could hear the pulse in her own ears, loud and steady as the pipes overhead. Then footsteps, moving away, growing quieter, gone. Callum Ashford let out a slow breath through his nose. It was the most human thing she had seen him do. "Building security," he said. Not quite a question. "No." Zola was already at the door, pressing her ear close to the gap at the frame. "Building security uses a master badge on the electronic panel. That was an old mechanical key in a lock that's been here since the building went up in '98. She listened another 5 seconds. Nothing. "And they walked away when they heard us go quiet. Security would have knocked and announced." He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. It kept adjusting, like a camera lens that hadn't found its focus yet. "You know a lot about this building," he said. 6 months, she said simply. "You learn the bones of a place." She moved away from the door and checked her phone. The lobby camera feed was still up. The 2 men were gone. That was either very good or very bad, and she didn't have enough information to know which. "They've cleared the lobby," she said, turning the screen toward him again. Callum looked at the feed. He'd gone very still, the kind of stillness that wasn't like the men in the lobby at all. Theirs had been practiced, professional. His was the stillness of someone processing something faster than he wanted to, running calculations he didn't like the results of. "I need to make a call," he said. "Private!" Zola stood up from the equipment crate, walked to the far end of the boiler room, and stood facing the wall of pipes. She stared at a section of copper tubing that had been patched twice in different decades. She could tell by the slight color difference in the solder. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Englewood, where the faucet had been patched exactly the same way. She thought about a lot of things. She gave him his privacy. She heard fragments anyway. The boiler room wasn't large enough for real distance. A name, Dex, a tone, controlled but urgent, numbers that might have been a license plate or a code. The word whacker twice. Then silence. Then, "Don't bring anyone in. Not yet. I need to know who authorized this before we move." A pause. "Yes, I know what I said. That was before. When he came back across the room, his jacket was still immaculate. His face had rearranged itself into something more composed, but his eyes were different. Something had moved in them while he'd been on the phone. Something that hadn't settled back down into its usual place. My security lead is running the plates on a vehicle that was outside earlier, he said. We'll have something in 20 minutes. I need to stay off the main floors until then. He looked around the boiler room with the expression of a man who had never in his adult life been in a boiler room and was finding it a more complex experience than expected. Is there somewhere less? He stopped himself, reconsidered the word he'd been about to use. There's a break room at the end of the service hallway, Zola said. Staff only. It'll be empty until shift change at 10. There's a coffee maker, a table, chairs. That works, he said. They walked back down the corridor. Zola unlocked the break room. A small, windowless space with a folding table, 4 mismatched chairs, a commercial coffee maker that had seen better days, and a whiteboard covered in shift schedules, and someone's hand-drawn diagram of the building's HVAC zones. There was a half-eaten box of Entenmann's donuts on the counter that Zola was 90% sure belonged to Rodrigo on the morning shift. But Rodrigo wasn't here, and this was a situation. Callum Ashford sat down at the folding table in his charcoal suit and looked at the Entenmann's donuts. Coffee? Zola asked. Please, he said. She made 2 cups. The machine gurgled and hissed with the enthusiasm of something that had nothing to prove. She set a cup in front of him. No cream, no sugar. She didn't offer because she didn't know how he took it and she wasn't going to guess. And sat down across from him with her own. He curled both hands around the paper cup the way people do when they need something to hold. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The boiler room hum was fainter here, more of a vibration than a sound. But it was still there, the building's heartbeat running underneath everything. You said you've been cleaning my floors since April, he said. Yes. I don't... He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. I don't remember seeing you. I know, Zola said. That landed differently than she'd intended it to, or maybe exactly as she'd intended it. She wasn't always sure which one was true when she said things like that. She watched him absorb it. She watched the discomfort move across his face and not quite find a place to settle. I'm not... He started again, stopped again. The inarticulate pausing of a man who was usually very articulate. That isn't how I... Mr. Ashford, she said, not unkindly. I clean 63 offices and 4 executive bathrooms 3 times a week. I've been doing some version of this job for 3 years. People don't see the cleaning staff. That's not a character indictment. It's just how it is. She took a sip of her coffee. It was terrible. It was always terrible. She drank it anyway. You didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't look. He was quiet for a moment. What's your name? He asked. Zola Beaumont. He repeated it once, quietly, like he was filing it somewhere permanent. Then, how long have you worked in building maintenance? 3 years, give or take. Started as a day shift cleaner at Northwestern Memorial, moved to commercial building contracts about 18 months ago. Meridian is my primary site. Before that? She looked at him steadily. Why? Because you identified a 2-man surveillance setup in under 10 minutes, knew exactly where the blind spots were in the lobby, had access to security camera feeds, knew the building's mechanical layout well enough to plot an exit route in real time, and managed to move a 6'2" man in a suit across a monitored lobby without anyone noticing. He set his coffee down. That's not standard training for commercial cleaning work, Miss Beaumont. She considered him. He was smarter than she'd given him credit for, or rather, she'd known he was smart in the abstract, the way you knew things about powerful people from a distance. This was something different. This was watching it operate up close. I was in law school, she said. Columbia. 2nd year. Something shifted in his expression. Was, he said. My mother had a cardiac event the October of my second year. She couldn't work. I have a younger sister, Priya. She's 19, still finishing high school then, now at community college. My mother has Medicare, but not enough of it. She said it the way she said most hard things, flat and direct, without softness, without asking for anything. I took a leave of absence, couldn't afford to go back. This pays the rent. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones, more uncomfortable, the particular discomfort of a person who has never had to make that specific calculation, being forced to sit across the table from someone who has made it every day for 3 years. Callum Ashford looked at his coffee cup. I'm sorry, he said, and the thing about it, the thing that surprised her slightly, was that it sounded like he actually meant it. Not the reflexive, boardroom-conditioned sympathy of a man performing concern, something slower, something that cost him a little. It's fine, she said. It's not, actually, he said quietly. She didn't argue with that. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and whatever the message contained, it changed the geometry of his face entirely. The composure cracking at the edges, something underneath it, going sharp and cold. Dex got a name on the plates, he said. He wasn't talking to her exactly. He was talking to the room, processing out loud the way people do when something they've feared has stopped being a theory. He set the phone face down on the table. Zola waited. The vehicle is registered to a holding company, he said. Shell, 3 layers deep, but Dex traced the insurance policy. The underlying owner is... He stopped, pressed his lips together. It's a family matter, he said finally. She didn't push. She'd grown up learning the particular weight of that phrase. He picked up his coffee again, stared at it without drinking. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay. You could have ignored those men. You could have mopped your baseboards and gone home at the end of your shift, and this entire morning would have been someone else's problem. He looked up at her. Why didn't you? Zola thought about it. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer had several layers, and she was deciding how many of them to give him. Someone was about to get hurt, she said. I was the only one who saw it coming. She turned the paper cup in her hands. That's the whole thing. There isn't more to it than that. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, I want to do something for you, for what you did today. No, she said. He blinked. Mr. Ashford, she said, and her voice was even and clear as water over stone. I didn't pull you into that corridor because I wanted something from you. I did it because it was the right thing to do. If you pay me for it, you change what it was. She set down her cup. So no. The look on his face. She thought about it for a long time afterward, trying to find the right word for it. It wasn't frustration, it wasn't quite disbelief. It was closer to the expression of a man who has spent a significant portion of his life surrounded by people who always wanted something from him, being confronted, for perhaps the first time in years, with someone who genuinely, demonstrably did not. He looked stunned, not by the danger, not by the surveillance men or the shell companies or whatever family matter was written on that screen, by her. The sound of her phone broke the moment, the ringtone she'd set for her sister, a 3-second clip of an old Beyoncé song that Priya had thought was hilarious and Zola had never bothered to change. She answered before the second ring. Priya. A beat of silence. Then her sister's voice, young and trying very hard not to sound frightened and failing. Zola, you need to come to Northwestern Memorial. It's Mama. A sharp breath. She collapsed at the pharmacy. They called an ambulance. I'm in the cab now. It's Zola. They said it's bad. Zola was already standing. She looked at Callum Ashford across the folding table, and he was already watching her, and something in her face must have told him everything. Because he stood up at the exact same moment she did, without being asked, without waiting to be told, and said, quietly and with no hesitation at all, I'll drive you. The car was a black Escalade, parked in the loading dock on Wacker, and Callum opened the passenger door before she could reach for it. Not performatively, just first, and they were moving before she'd finished buckling her seatbelt. No driver. She'd half assumed there would be a driver. Instead, it was just him, pulling into traffic with the focused efficiency of someone who had driven himself far more recently than his tax bracket suggested. "Northwestern Memorial," she said. "I know where it is," he said. He merged north and didn't speak for 2 minutes. Zola used the silence to text Priya, "On my way, 15 minutes. Don't let them do anything without me there." Then she stared at the Chicago River going silver-grey under the October sky and did the thing she had trained herself to do in crisis. Breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs and feel exactly one thing at a time. Right now, afraid. She sat with it. "She's had episodes before?" Callum asked. "Careful, not cold." "2. One 4 years ago, one 18 months back. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. HCM. The second one was bad enough that they talked about a defibrillator implant, but she was scared, and there were insurance complications, and she—" Zola stopped. "She's stubborn. I drove her to a follow-up last Thursday. She seemed okay." "Okay is relative with HCM," he said. She looked at him. He was watching the road. "You know what that is," she said. "My wife had a congenital heart condition." A beat. "She died 3 years ago. Different diagnosis. But I learned the vocabulary." He changed lanes around a delivery truck. "I'm sorry about your mother." Zola nodded once and looked back at the window. Priya was in the ICU waiting area on the 4th floor. Mustard-colored chairs, a television no one was watching, a vending machine coffee she was holding so tight the cup had deformed. She stood up the second she saw Zola. They held each other without speaking. Priya made a sound against her shoulder that she swallowed back immediately. That was the most either of them could afford right now. "She's stable," Priya said. "Serious, but stable. They're running an echo." Her voice fractured slightly. "She was at the pharmacy picking up her metoprolol. It ran out last week and she kept saying she'd go." She pressed her lips together. "She was on the floor when the pharmacist found her." "She's stable," Zola said. "Not comfort. Anchor. This is the fact. We stand here." Priya repeated it back, quieter. Then she noticed Callum. He was standing at the entrance to the waiting room, far enough back to give them space, doing an admirable impression of someone deeply interested in the hospital safety pamphlets on the wall rack. "Who is that?" Priya said, in the flat tone that meant, "Explain this immediately." "It's complicated," Zola said. "That suit is not complicated. That suit is extremely legible." "Priya, I'm just—" "Later." Zola gestured toward Callum, small, efficient, and he crossed the room. "This is Callum Ashford. He drove me here." She looked at him. "My sister Priya." Priya assessed him with the frank, unguarded directness of someone who had been reading Rooms for Survival her entire life. "You're the Ashford group. Zola cleans your office." "Yes," he said, to both, no adjustment of framing. Priya looked at her sister. Zola gave her the look. Priya, who had been receiving and interpreting that look since she was 7, sat back down. Callum excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Zola watched him through the glass, on his phone, speaking quietly. He was back in 12 minutes. He came to where she was sitting and crouched down, level with her, not above her, and said, "I called a colleague, Dr. Adrienne Okafor. Top cardiologist in Illinois, HCM specialist trained at Mayo. She's finishing a procedure and she'll be here within the hour to review your mother's case." Zola stared at him. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know," he said. "Mr. Ashford—" "Callum. Callum." She kept her voice even. "I told you this morning I don't want anything from you. Your mother deserves the best available care, regardless of whether you pulled me into a service corridor today." He held her gaze. "She's a person. She deserves it anyway. Let me do this one thing. Zola thought about arguing. She had the argument fully formed, about autonomy, about charity, about how money reframed acts of grace into transactions without anyone intending it. She'd made that argument before, in different rooms. She thought about her mother on the floor of a pharmacy. "Okay," she said. He nodded and went to sit on the opposite side of the room, where he read his phone with the deliberate quietness of someone who understood the right contribution right now was to take up as little space as possible. Priya leaned close. "He's calling in the best HCM cardiologist in Illinois for Mama. And you're annoyed." "I'm not annoyed." "You have the face." "Zola, I don't have a face. The one you've had since you were 12, when someone does something for you that you didn't ask for, and you don't know how to hold it." Priya looked across the room. "He seems like he's trying." "He walked past me for 6 months without looking," Zola said. "I know," Priya said, "but he's here now." Zola didn't answer that. Dr. A. Okafor arrived at 12:43, tall, Ghanaian American, 50s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The authority of someone who'd spent 30 years in rooms where authority was the only currency that mattered. She reviewed Nadine's echo for 11 minutes, asked 4 sharp questions, and came out to speak to Zola directly. "Significant arrhythmic event. Her HCM is progressing. The medication is managing symptoms but isn't sufficient. We need to discuss a septal reduction procedure and likely an ICD implant." A pause. "The good news, she's responding to the antiarrhythmic from the ambulance. She's awake. She's asking for you." Zola was standing before the sentence was finished. "Room 7, Dr. Okafor said. 3rd left." Zola was already in the hallway. She stopped, turned, and looked back at Callum, still in his chair, phone face down on his knee now, watching her with an expression she couldn't afford to look at too long. "Thank you," she said. It came out smaller than intended. It carried more than intended. Both things were true at the same time. He nodded once. No performance around it. She went to find her mother. Nadine Beaumont was 61 and had the face of a woman who had weathered more than her share and intended to weather more. She was propped against the hospital pillows with leads on her chest and an IV in her arm and the specific expression of someone deeply annoyed at having caused a fuss. "You didn't have to come from work," she said. "Mama, I'm fine. You collapsed at the pharmacy." "I tripped." The pharmacist called 911. He was dramatic. But her eyes went soft with relief as Zola sat down and took her hand. The hand was warm. That was always the first check. Warm meant blood was moving. "I'm right here," Zola said. "I'm not going anywhere." Nadine looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then, "Something happened today, before this. You have a look." Zola almost laughed. Her mother had always been able to read the thing underneath the surface, the layer she hadn't decided yet how to name. "Something did," she said. "I'll tell you later." "Good or bad?" Zola thought about a boiler room. Bad coffee. A man in a charcoal suit asleep in a plastic chair with his jacket folded under his head. "I genuinely don't know yet," she said. Her mother squeezed her hand once and closed her eyes. She walked back to the waiting room 2 hours later to find both Priya and Callum asleep in adjacent chairs, her sister with the Howard hoodie pulled up over half her face, Callum with his jacket under his head, eyes closed, the unguarded sleep of someone who had simply stopped performing watchfulness. He'd been there 3 hours. Zola stood in the doorway and looked at it. She had spent 3 years being invisible to people like him. She had learned not to resent it. Resentment was expensive, and she was already running a deficit in ways that had nothing to do with money. She had learned to be self-contained, to not need things from people who wouldn't see her anyway. And now he was asleep in a plastic chair with his jacket under his head. It didn't fit any category she had. She didn't know what to do with it except let it exist. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ms. Beaumont. Dex Katayanagi, Head of Security, Ashford Group. We've identified the men from this morning. Mr. Ashford needs to see this immediately. Please wake him." She crossed the room and touched his shoulder. Light once. He was awake in under a second, fully alert, the eyes of someone who had never fully stopped watching even in sleep. "Your security team," she said, holding out the phone. He read the screen, and something in his face went still, completely still, in the way that happened not when someone was calm, but when a man had run clean out of room to be surprised. "It's my brother," he said. Not to her, to the air, to the fact of it. Devlin. The name landed between them like something dropped from a great height, and the sound it made when it hit was not loud at all. Just final. The particular quiet of a betrayal that had been building for a long time without anyone saying so out loud. He said his brother's name once, and then he didn't say it again. Zola watched him fold it away. The shock, the whatever came before shock, all of it. With the practiced speed of someone who'd learned early that feeling things in front of other people was a liability. He handed her phone back. He stood up. He walked to the window at the far end of the waiting room and made a call. She sat down. She gave him the same privacy he had given her in the boiler room. She faced the other direction and didn't listen for fragments. It seemed like the correct exchange. Priya was still asleep, half buried in her hoodie, breathing slowly. Outside the window, the October afternoon had gone flat and pale, the kind of Chicago sky that couldn't decide between rain and just disappointing everyone. A food cart rattled past in the corridor. The PA called a code that meant nothing to Zola and something urgent to whoever was running toward it somewhere in the building. When Callum came back, his face was a different kind of control than before. Before, he'd been managing something unpleasant. Now he was managing something that had sharp edges. "Dex is pulling together the full picture," he said. He sat down 2 chairs from her, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped. "The vehicle traces to a shell company my brother set up 18 months ago. The 2 men have private security backgrounds, both previously contracted to a firm Devlin's used before for..." He paused, selected a word. "Business purposes." "He's done this before," Zola said. "Not this," Callum said, then quieter. "Not this." She looked at his hands. They were still, very deliberately still. "What happens now?" she asked. "My legal team is being briefed. My board chair is being notified. Dex is coordinating with CPD." He stared at the middle distance. "And I need to figure out what I was going to do today, before all of this, because I think that's why today happened." He refocused on her. "I had an appointment with my estate attorney this afternoon. I've been restructuring my succession plan. Devlin, under the current structure, stands to inherit a controlling interest in Ashford Group if I die without a named successor." He said it plainly, clinically. "That changes today, or it would have if I'd made it to the appointment." Zola was quiet for a moment. "Your brother tried to have you abducted to stop you from changing your will," she said. "That appears to be what the evidence suggests," he said, in the voice of a man who understood that naming it plainly was the only way to hold it. "I'm sorry," she said. He glanced at her. "You've been saying that a lot today." "So have you." Something passed across his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. "Fair," he said. They sat in the parallel silence of 2 people who had landed, through entirely unpredictable means, on the same shore, and were both still figuring out what that meant. "How is she?" he asked. "Sleeping. They say the arrhythmia is under control for now. Dr. Okafor wants to schedule a full workup this week and then talk about the ICD implant." Zola folded her hands in her lap. "She's going to fight it. She fought it the last time." "Because of the surgery risk. Because she doesn't like being dependent on a machine. She's from a generation that treats illness as a personal failure. Getting the implant means admitting the illness won. And you'll talk her through it." "I'll try." She glanced at him. "You said your wife had a heart condition." "She did. She resisted a device for a long time, too. He looked at his hands. I kept thinking we had time. The doctors were optimistic. A long breath. Heart conditions don't negotiate. You don't get more time just because you feel okay. For a moment, the charcoal suit and the boardroom competence fell away entirely, and he was just a man who'd been carrying something for 3 years and hadn't put it down. My mother will be furious about the implant, Zola said. She'll argue with the doctors, argue with me, make all of us miserable for 3 weeks. Her voice caught just slightly at the end. And then she'll do it, because she doesn't want to leave us. That's the thing she can't argue with. Callum didn't look away, didn't fill the space with something useless. She's lucky, he said, to have someone who knows her well enough to know that. Zola didn't answer. She'd learned some things were better received without deflection. Priya woke up at 4:15, blinked at the waiting room like she'd forgotten where she was, and then remembered all at once in the way that only happened when something bad was happening, and sleep was the only escape. Go see her, Zola said. She's awake. She'll want to see you. Priya went, still pulling her hoodie down, sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She paused in the doorway and looked back at Callum with the frank assessment she'd been running on him since she arrived. Then she said, to neither of them in particular, there's decent Ethiopian food 2 blocks south if anyone's hungry. I'm just putting it out there. She disappeared down the hallway. Callum looked at Zola. Your sister, he said. She's something, Zola agreed. She's remarkable, he said simply. Been holding this together all day. 19, Zola said. Malcolm X College nursing program. She's going to be extraordinary. Something moved across her face. She already is. He was watching her. She could feel it. The quality of the attention had shifted. Not assessment anymore. Something harder to name. Tell me about Columbia, he said. Why? Because you were studying law at one of the best programs in the country, and you left without, from everything I've seen today, a trace of self-pity. He met her gaze. I want to understand that. You would have done the same if it was your family. Maybe, he said, but I don't think I'd have done it as quietly. Being loud about sacrifice doesn't make it mean more. It just costs more energy. I needed the energy for other things. He was quiet a moment. What were you going to do with the degree? She didn't hesitate. The answer had never changed. Housing law, tenant advocacy, Englewood, Woodlawn, South Shore, neighborhoods where people get displaced because they don't know what they're legally entitled to, and landlords bank on that ignorance. She paused. My mother's neighbor got evicted on an invalid notice. She left because she didn't know she could fight it. I did know, but I had no credential behind my name, so the property manager laughed at me. Her voice stayed flat and even. He stopped laughing when I cited the Illinois Residential Tenants Act, but I couldn't make it stick. Not without the degree. Callum was looking at her with an expression she would later struggle to describe to Priya. It didn't map onto the categories she had for people of his kind. Not pity, not abstract admiration, not the slightly uncomfortable benevolence of wealth, encountering hardship and not knowing what to do with its hands. Something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of someone seeing a quality they had thought was rarer than it apparently was. You need to go back, he said. I know, she said. Then, Callum. She said his name deliberately, the same way he'd offered it, level even with weight behind it. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, not today. Today, my mother is in ICU room 7, and your brother tried to have you grabbed off a street, and we are both sitting here running on bad coffee and 5 hours of crisis management. She looked at him steadily. Today isn't for solving my life. He absorbed that. Then, okay. Okay, she agreed. A nurse appeared in the doorway, young, tired, kind-faced. Ms. Beaumont? Your mother is asking if everyone is staying for dinner. She appears to be under the impression this is a social visit and has requested that someone bring her a Portillo's beef sandwich. Zola closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, Callum Ashford was trying not to smile. The effort was losing. "She asked for Portillo's," he said. "She's been asking for Portillo's for 3 years every time she's in the hospital," Zola said. "She's never once gotten it." "That seems like something that could be fixed," he said. "Don't you dare." He already had his phone out. "Callum—" "It's a beef sandwich," he said. "You fought me on the cardiologist. Let me have the sandwich." And for the first time all day, through all of it, through the boiler room and the car and the waiting room and the 4 hours of sitting in plastic chairs and the heaviness of all the things they'd said and not said, Zola Beaumont laughed. A real one. It surprised her. She felt it come up from somewhere she hadn't accessed in a while, and it came out warm and unguarded, and briefly, completely unmanaged. Callum heard it. The expression on his face, when she finally looked at him again, was the most unguarded she had seen all day. His phone buzzed before either of them could say anything. He looked at the screen, read it, and then the unguarded expression was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold and completely still. He turned the phone toward her so she could see it. It was a text from Dex Katayanagi, 4 words, followed by a news link. "It's already gone public." The headline on the screen read, "Ashford Group are embroiled in alleged abduction plot. Mystery woman at center of billionaire security incident." Beneath the headline, grainy but unmistakable, pulled from the lobby camera footage, were 2 people, Callum Ashford and a woman in a blue cleaning uniform, crossing the lobby of Meridian Tower at speed. Zola's face. On a news website. Already cached, already spreading. Her supervisor's name was already in her phone contacts. She saw the missed call notification appear at the top of her screen a second later, then the voicemail notification. She knew, before she played it, exactly what it would say. The voicemail was 43 seconds long. Zola played it standing in the hospital corridor, phone pressed to her ear, one hand flat against the wall. She kept her face still. She had a lot of practice keeping her face still. Her supervisor's name was Gerald Pittman, 54 years old, managed the cleaning contracts for 7 commercial buildings in the Loop, and operated with the specific energy of a man who believed that small authority exercised harshly was the same thing as large authority. He had never liked Zola because Zola did her job without requiring his approval, and that had always read to him as a kind of insubordination. The voicemail was professional in the way that terminations were professional when someone had already consulted HR. It cited a clause in her employment agreement about unauthorized use of building security systems. It cited another clause about conduct unbecoming of a Meridian Tower service contractor. It wished her well. It gave her 2 weeks of severance because that was what the contract required, and not 1 day more. 43 seconds, 3 years of showing up. 43 seconds. She put the phone in her apron pocket. She was still in her uniform, had been in it all day, would go home in it tonight, and stood in the corridor for a moment with her hand flat against the wall. Then she went back into the waiting room. Callum was already on the phone. She could tell from the way he was standing, the way his free hand had closed into a loose fist at his side, the particular controlled simmer of someone managing fury at low heat so it didn't boil onto the wrong target. "Find out who leaked the footage," he said as she came in. "Internal or external, I want to know within the hour, and get Hartwell on a filing, injunction, ready by morning." A pause. "No, don't wait. Consider this the authorization." He ended the call. He looked at her. He read her face. "The voicemail," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. She sat down. He sat 2 chairs away and didn't say anything. That was the right thing to do. Some part of her noted it distantly. 3 years, 63 offices, 4 executive bathrooms, the broken-wheeled mop bucket dragged sideways down every hallway, the motivational quote above the sink on 31 that she'd memorized against her will. All of it. 43 seconds. "Is your mother stable enough to leave for the night?" Callum asked quietly. "Priya's staying." "Then go home. Sleep. You don't have to solve everything tonight." "I know," she said. She didn't move for a long time. The news cycle did not wait for anyone to be ready. By 9 that evening, Zola Beaumont's name was in 4 separate stories. By 10, 14. The coverage split cleanly. Half about Callum and the alleged abduction plot, Devlin's name leaking within hours of the CPD call despite Dex's best efforts. The other half about Zola, the grainy lobby footage, the blue uniform, the yellow gloves, the headline writers who had decided that mystery cleaning woman saves billionaire was a story and were proving themselves right. By midnight, a Twitter thread about her had been shared 40,000 times. By the time she got home to her apartment on South Marshfield, 1 bedroom, 2nd floor of a 2-flat, a kitchen where the faucet ran a little hot even on cold, her phone had died from notification volume and she let it stay dead. She sat at the kitchen table in her uniform and made a cup of tea. She thought about her mother in ICU room 7, asking about Portillo's beef sandwiches. She thought about Priya asleep in a waiting room chair with a Howard hoodie over her face. She thought about a boiler room at 8:53 in the morning, a cracked screen phone, a man who had never once looked at her. She thought about what he looked like, asleep in a plastic chair with his jacket under his head. She drank her tea. At 6:30 the next morning, she put on the only non-uniform outfit that felt like armor. Dark slacks, cream blouse, her good coat, a camel wool thing from the Brown Elephant on North Clark Street, 4 years old, never once regretted. She charged her phone for 20 minutes without looking at the notifications. She went back to the hospital. Her mother was sitting up in bed eating oatmeal, with the expression of someone who'd been told it was good for them and decided to believe it provisionally. She looked up when Zola came in, and her face did the thing it always did, the softening that was only ever for her daughters. "Tell me what's happening," Nadine said. "The nurses tried to take my phone." "Because you were reading news articles at 2 in the morning. I was checking on my child." She set down the oatmeal. "Is that him? In the picture from the building?" "Yes. He came here. He drove me. He stayed." Zola sat down. "His brother is behind what happened yesterday. CPD is involved. It's going to get loud before it quiets down." Her mother studied her with the comprehensive, non-negotiable attention of someone who had been reading this face since the day it was born. "And you got fired," Nadine said. Zola looked at her. "How did you know?" "Because you're wearing your good coat at 7 in the morning and you have the jaw you get when you're holding something." Her mother put the spoon down. "Gerald Pittman." "Yes." Nadine was quiet for a moment. "Then good." Zola blinked. "That job was a waiting room," her mother said. "You were waiting in it because of us, because of me. I am not spending my recovery feeling guilty about you being stuck there." She looked at her daughter steadily. "I am choosing to view Gerald Pittman as an act of God. What comes next?" Zola sat with that for a moment, the directness of it. The way her mother could take something crushing and rotate it 45 degrees until the light hit differently. "I have a plan," she said. "I know you do," her mother said. She picked up the oatmeal again. "You always do." The knock on Callum Ashford's penthouse door came at 7:47 that evening. He opened it. Zola was standing in the hallway in her good coat with her termination letter folded once, precisely along the center. She held it out toward him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Come in," he said. "I'm not staying," she said. "I just need to say something." He stepped back anyway, and she came in anyway, because the hallway was narrow and the corridor lighting was the kind that made every conversation feel like an interrogation, and this one deserved better than that. The penthouse was large, beautiful in parts, but it had the specific quality of a space being maintained rather than lived in, the way a house felt when the person inside it was mostly somewhere else. She stood in the entryway and held the letter out between them. "Your world cost me this job," she said. "Not you specifically, the situation. The footage leaked because Devlin's people needed a distraction from the criminal exposure, and my face was in it, and Gerald Pittman used it to clear a contractor he'd been looking for a reason to clear for 3 years. She kept her voice level. I'm not here because I'm angry at you. I'm here because I need you to understand what happened, and I need to ask you for something that I am not asking as a favor. He hadn't moved. He was watching her with complete, unhurried attention. I want a job, she said, a real one. Not a title invented to make you feel better about what happened. I want to work. I have 3 years of commercial building knowledge, 2 years of Columbia law, and everything I was before I had to stop being it. Community affairs, tenant relations, whatever you call it in your organization. There are people in Englewood and Woodlawn being displaced by development projects, some of them carrying Ashford Group's name. I know those neighborhoods. I know those people. I know the law well enough to fight in it, and I'll know it better once I finish what I started. She lowered the letter. I'm the right person for a job that exists and needs doing. That's what I'm telling you. You owe me nothing. But I want the job. The penthouse was very quiet. Chicago at night pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, all lit grid and lake-black darkness at the edge. Callum Ashford looked at her for a long time, running the full calculation, arriving at an answer he trusted. Then, when can you start? She stared at him. That's it, she said. Did you want more pushback? I prepared for more pushback. Everything you said is correct, he said. The job exists. You're the right person. He paused. You're also going to finish law school. I'm establishing a scholarship fund this week connected to the Ashford Group Community Reinvestment Initiative, and the first recipient is non-negotiable. He said it the way she said things, flat, direct, done. You can fight me on it, or you can let me have it. Zola looked at him. She thought about what Priya had said in the waiting room. He seems like he's trying. She thought about the boiler room. The bad coffee, the plastic chair, the jacket folded under his head. You can have it, she said. Something eased in his face, not relief, more like a thing that had been slightly off balance all day, finding its level. One more thing, he said. Devlin has retained counsel. He's going to fight the charges and make this ugly. The coverage is going to get worse before it gets better, and your name is already in it. He held her gaze. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you and your family clear of it, but I can't promise it's clean. The world I live in isn't always fair to people who stumble into it by doing the right thing. I know, she said. I'm sorry, he said. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it, he said. She turned toward the door, then stopped, turned back. What was her name? She said. Your wife. Something moved in his eyes, the weight she'd seen all day, but different now, less sealed. Renee, he said. She nodded. She would have liked today, Zola said. All of it. The boiler room, the bad coffee, the plastic chairs. She looked at him steadily. Women like Renee always like the days that don't go according to plan. That's where you find out what people are actually made of. She left before he could answer. But as the elevator doors were closing, she heard it, just barely, a quiet exhale from the direction of the penthouse doorway. The sound of someone setting something down that they had been carrying for a very long time. The first Monday was the hardest. Not because the work was hard, the work was the easiest part. Callum had given her a corner office on the 28th floor with a window that looked east toward the lake, and a desk that was too large for what she currently needed and that she intended to grow into. Her title was Director of Community Affairs and Tenant Relations. Her salary was 4 times what Gerald Pittman had paid her. Her benefits included full medical coverage, which meant that Nadine Beaumont's cardiologist bills, the quiet financial terror behind every day for 3 years, were, for the first time, not Zola's problem alone. The first Monday was hard because when the elevator doors opened, 3 people were waiting with coffee and files and professional curiosity, and one of them said, "Good morning, Ms. Beaumont," and Zola had to stand very still for exactly 1 second before she could answer. The last time she'd been addressed that way in a building, she'd been mopping the floor. She answered, took the coffee, sat down, and got to work. By Wednesday, she had read every Ashford Group development contract touching Englewood, Woodlawn and South Shore going back 7 years. By Friday, she had identified 11 situations where tenants had been displaced without legally adequate relocation assistance and had drafted a remediation framework she intended to present to the board the following week. Callum read it Friday afternoon. He called her at 5:45. "This is good," he said. "It's a start," she said. "The board will push back on the costs." "Pages 7 through 9, she said. A pause. "I saw pages 7 through 9. And? You'll be fine." Something lighter in his voice than she'd heard before. More air in it. "The board chairman is Whitfield Reams, 72. Grew up in Bronzeville. He's been waiting 20 years for someone to bring him exactly this conversation. Then he and I will get along," she said. She heard him almost laugh, that same near smile from the service corridor, the one that lived next door to the real thing. "Good night, Zola," he said. "Good night," she said. She sat in the empty office after that, looking east at the lake going dark in the November evening. She had grown up watching that city from ground level. Bus windows, L platforms, the second floor of a 2-flat on South Marshfield. She had cleaned its offices from the inside out, learned its bones, learned where the baseboards were dirtiest. She was still learning it. She intended to keep going. Devlin Ashford was arrested on a Tuesday in early November, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, criminal solicitation. His attorney issued the predictable statement about presumption of innocence and family complexity. Callum issued nothing. His communications team put out 4 words: "We will not comment." The board voted to suspend Devlin's seat and grant Callum an expanded mandate, 11-1. The dissenting vote resigned the following week. Whitfield Reams told Crane's Chicago Business that it was less a consolidation of power than the company finding its spine. Zola read the quote at her desk and called her mother to read it to her. Nadine said, "Good, now put the phone down and get back to work." Nadine's ICD was implanted on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of November at Northwestern Memorial. Zola and Priya spent the 2 hours and 12 minutes of the procedure in the same 4th-floor waiting room where everything had started to change. Priya had brought her anatomy textbook and a thermos of real coffee. At some point she said, "3 months ago we were terrified about Mama's heart because we couldn't afford the specialist. Now she has Dr. Okafor, full coverage, the procedure she needed 2 years ago." She turned a page. "Because you grabbed a man's sleeve in a lobby. I grabbed his sleeve because he was about to get hurt," Zola said. "I know. That's what's funny. You didn't do it for any of this. You did it because it was right. And all of this came from that." Priya looked at her. "Mama calls that God. I'd call it physics." "I'd call it a broken mop bucket wheel and good timing," Zola said. Priya laughed. The mustard chairs absorbed it without complaint. Dr. Okafor came out at 2:14 with the settled expression of a surgeon whose work had gone exactly as planned. "She's out. It went well. She's already asking about the cafeteria menu." Zola put her face in her hands for 3 seconds. Then she straightened up and went to see her mother. Thanksgiving fell the way it always fell in the Beaumont apartment on South Marshfield. Too much food, not enough counter space. Priya burning the first batch of cornbread. Nadine holding court from the kitchen table because Dr. Okafor had cleared her for light activity, and Nadine had her own firmly held definition of light. Zola was elbow deep in collard greens at 11 a.m. when her phone buzzed. "Happy Thanksgiving," Callum said. "Happy Thanksgiving." She leaned against the counter. "How are you?" "Better than last month." A pause. Easy, not strained. "I've wanted to say something for weeks and kept not finding the right moment." He was quiet for a beat. "You changed things, not the obvious thing, the other things. The ways a person can be so inside their own life, they stop actually living it." Another pause. "I'd been doing that since Renee. You reminded me that the point of building things is not the buildings." Zola looked out the window at the November street, bare trees, grey sky. "That's a lot to get from a boiler room," she said. "The boiler room was just the beginning." And there it was, the real laugh, warm and unhurried, the one she'd first heard in the hospital waiting room and had been thinking about since. "I was wondering if you had plans later." From the stove, Priya looked up from the cornbread with total, undisguised attention. Zola turned her back to her sister. "The official reason is pie," Callum said. "There's a place on Michigan Avenue, but I want to see you. That's the actual reason." The kitchen smelled like collard greens and slightly burned cornbread and the warmth of too many people in a space built for fewer, all of whom belonged exactly where they were. "Come here first," she said. "There's food." Silence. "Are you sure?" Careful. He understood what the invitation meant, not the food, but the specific weight of being asked into someone's actual life. "Mama's been asking about you," Zola said. "And Priya will never forgive me if she doesn't interrogate you in person. That's," she heard the smile, "terrifying." "Yes," she said. "Come anyway." He arrived at 2:15 exactly, in a navy coat she hadn't seen before, less formal than the charcoal suit, the coat of someone trying to be a person rather than a presentation. He was holding a white bakery box tied with string. "Sweet potato," he said when she opened the door. The woman at the bakery said it without hesitating. I trusted her. "Good instinct," Zola said. Priya appeared from the kitchen doorway, spatula, Howard hoodie, the expression of someone rationing patience. "Callum," he said, before she could say Mr. Ashford. She looked at him. She looked at the pie. The jury remained technically out, but the pie was noted as evidence. From the kitchen, "Bring him in here where I can see him." He looked at Zola. She gave him the smallest possible expression that meant, "This is what you signed up for." He walked in. Nadine Beaumont looked at Callum Ashford the way she looked at everything, direct, comprehensive, unbothered by the distance between his life and her kitchen table. "Sit down," she said. "You've been standing in the doorway of my daughter's life long enough. You might as well come in properly." He sat down. Zola stood in the doorway with a dish towel in her hands and watched Callum Ashford, Penthouse, Charcoal Suits, Ashford Group, receive Nadine Beaumont's full attention with something that looked remarkably like relief, like he had been standing in doorways for a long time, like this was better. Priya appeared at Zola's shoulder, quietly. "He's nervous." "I know." "He's nervous and he came anyway." "I know," Zola said. "That's always the whole thing," Priya said. Later, much later after the food and the interrogations and the sweet potato pie, which was objectively excellent, Callum was washing dishes because he had simply started and nobody had stopped him, and Zola was drying, and Priya and Nadine had moved to the living room, and the kitchen had gone quiet the way kitchens did after a good meal when there was nothing left to prove. "Thank you," he said, "for today." "You brought a pie," she said. "You earned it." He handed her a bowl. She dried it. "You saved my life in that alley," he said plainly, no speech built around it. Just the fact, set down between them like something that needed to be said out loud before it could be what it actually was. She turned to look at him. "You were already worth saving," she said. He looked at her. The dish soap was still running. The November city moved outside the window. From the living room came the sound of Nadine laughing at something Priya had said, warm and real, the laugh of a woman who had her daughter's home and her heart repaired, and 30 more Thanksgivings ahead of her if she had anything to say about it. Callum turned off the water. He was still looking at her, and Zola Beaumont, who had spent 3 years being invisible in the buildings of this city, who had dragged a broken mop bucket sideways without complaint, who had given up a future and rebuilt it from the floor up, who had pulled a stranger through a service corridor door because it was the right thing to do, and for no other reason, did not look away. She let herself be seen. For the first time in a very long time, she let herself be entirely, completely, unmanageably seen. And it turned out that was not the terrifying thing she had spent 3 years believing it would be. It turned out it was just this. A kitchen in Englewood. Dish soap. A navy coat on the back of a chair. The sound of her family in the next room. The city doing what the city did outside the window. And someone, finally, looking back. The end.